Hi, I'm CA Janak Vaghani from Mumbai, speaking on behalf of the Confederation of GST Professionals and Industry Mumbai. It is an association all India basis to represent the interest of the tax professionals before the government and the court and to take necessary steps to make a good law. I joined the association because I felt a need that it should be all India basis to take care of the tax professional and particularly taxpayers. This presentation is on the new proposed returns under the GST law, which is to be implemented from October 2019. The new returns are proposed and there are no rules provided till today. So the source of information for this presentation is the proposed section 39 and already enacted section 43 of the Act. Further online information on return forms available on CBSE site, which are uploaded for public domain. Before we start and discuss the relevant provisions of the GST law about the returns, it is necessary to consider the legal provisions thereof. As per section 39(1) of the Act, as proposed to be substituted by Finance Bill number 2 of 2019, which is passed by the Lok Sabha and yet to be passed by the Rajya Sabha. Every registered person other than an input service distributor or a non-resident taxable person or a person paying tax under the composition and TDS and the TCS payer shall, for every calendar month or part thereof, furnish a return electronically. The return should contain the details of inward and outward supply of the goods or services or both, input tax credit availed, tax payable, tax paid, and such other particulars, in such form and manner and within such time as may be prescribed. Further, as per proviso, the government may, on the recommendation of the councils, notify certain class of registered person shall furnish a quarterly return for every quarter or part thereof, subject to such condition and restriction as may be specified therein. For subsection 7, the provision is also introduced that every registered person who is required to furnish it under subsection 3 shall pay the tax accordingly. As per proposed subsection 2, a registered person paying composition tax under the provisions of section 10 shall file for each financial year or part thereof, furnish a return in such form and manner and within such time as may be prescribed. Under the proposed amended law, each registered person other than person paying composition tax, IST, TDS and TCS is required to file monthly return. Certain class of persons as notified shall file quarterly returns. Person paying composition shall file an annual return. The provisions for procedure for furnishing return and availing ITC is already provided in section 43A of the Act, which was introduced from 1st February 2019 by amendment to October 2018. Section 43 provides for procedure for furnishing returns and availing of ITC. Accordingly, every registered person shall, in the returns furnished under subsection 1 of section 39, verify, validate, modify or delete the details of supplies furnished by the suppliers. The government may prescribe procedure for availing of input tax credit by the recipient and verification thereof, furnishing the details of outward supplies by the supplier on the common portal for the purpose of availing ITC by the recipient. Availing input tax credit in respect of outward supplies not furnished by subsection 3, which may include the maximum amount of ITC which can be so availed, not exceeding 20% of the ITC available on the basis of details furnished by the suppliers under the said subsection. The amount of tax specified in the outward supplies for which the details have been furnished by the supplier under the section shall be deemed to be the tax payable by him under the provisions of the Act. So accordingly, Whatever the invoices uploaded by the supplier in his Annex 1, it is to be deemed to be paid by the supplier. Subsection 6 of the Act provides for joint and several liability of the supplier and the recipient of a supply for input tax credit availed, as the case may be in relation to outward supply for which details have been furnished under the Act, but return thereof has not been furnished. So, according to new procedure for furnishing returns and availing ITC, the recipient is allowed to take credit of ITC only on the basis of invoice uploaded by the supplier from time to time. This is a new departure from the policy of the government that earlier, under the existing provisions, the R2 was the return which was to be uploaded on the basis of the return one filed by the supplier. Because of the technical problem and glitches, the mechanism of R2 is not implemented. In the guise of the new return procedures, the R2 is introduced from a backdoor in the form of Annex 2. It is the same thing, but there are a little upward amendment positive for facilitating the ITC claim by the supplier, by the recipient. But the one thing is common, that the ITC cannot be claimed unless the supplier furnishes the invoices. In certain circumstances, the ITC is allowed to be claimed by the recipients on a provisional basis, but of course, this claim of ITC is subject to furnishing of the invoices details by the supplier, that one should not forget it. It is also provided under the law the joint and several liability of the supplier as well as the recipient in respect of the ITC claimed and the details of outward tax supplied but not paid by the supplier. This is a new provision. It was not in the earlier act, but now under the amended law, this provision is introduced. We will have to wait and watch the exact mechanism, how it would be worked out, how the person can exempt himself on the basis of the tax paid by the other person. That procedure is not yet been provided, so we will have to wait and watch for the time being. Then the recipient is allowed to take credit on provisional basis for missing invoices which are not supplied by the supplier. Now there is a limit for that as per the law, and it would be provided by the government by way of rules, but the section provides that it can be taken only up to 20% of invoices uploaded by the supplier. So it is not a blanket provision that all the missing invoices can be claimed as a ITC by the recipient, but it is subject to the limit provided by the law. The amount of tax specified invoices uploaded by the supplier is deemed to be the liability of the supplier. That also one has to be very careful and see that as and when the supplier upload the invoices, the tax which is shown by him in the Annexure 1 is deemed to be his tax liability. And the supplier and recipient is jointly and severally liable for invoices uploaded ITC claim when return thereof is not furnished. Now, new return provisions also provide that the council has decided to implement new return procedures on trial basis from July 2019. So today, the return utility has been started. One can upload the invoices today in respect of the July 2019 on a real-time basis. Of course, it is not meant mandatorily, but it is provided voluntarily. So every supplier should now try and see that how the invoices are uploaded on the system and how it is being reflected in recipient in Annexure 2, and one can see and match the invoices uploaded and received by the recipient for time being when it is made mandatory. The necessary amendment is yet to be made in the rules. The government has provided the new return procedures in public domain. Accordingly, now the scheme is such that registered person having PAN-based aggregate turnover more than 5 crore in a previous year shall file monthly return. Other registered persons shall file quarterly return but to pay tax on self-assessed basis in PMT08 every month. It is not that quarterly return dealers, return filers need not file any return for monthly basis. It is provided to file a PMT08 simple return every month, and in the third month of the quarter he will file the return, full-fledged return. Person having composition shall file single annual return and pay tax quarterly in CMP08. This is already implemented from April 2009. Instead of existing R1, there shall be Annex 1 for details of taxable outward supplies, including and supplies under LUT, imports and inward supplies attracting reverse charge mechanism. That is, wherever the tax liability is there by the supplier, the details thereof is to be given in Annex 1. And this is to be furnished details on real-time basis. Today you have made the invoices. At that point of time also you can upload the invoices in Annex 1. Instead of R2, there shall be auto-drafted details of inward supplies in Form GST Annex 2. It shall auto-populate details of the invoices furnished by supplier in GST Annex 1 on real-time basis. So it would be a mirror image. The invoice details which are uploaded by the supplier would be reflected in the Annex 2 of the recipient on a mirror image basis. The ditto, same to same details would be there in the Annex 2. And Annex 2 provides a facility to accept, reject or keep pending invoices. And it is to be furnished along with Form GST RAT 1. There is no need to upload Annex 2 separately. Earlier in R2, it was expected to furnish separately, so there were the three uploadings by the persons, one R1, one R2, and the return in 3 form. Now one has to file two uploading, Annex 1 for details of outward invoices and return along with the Annex 2. Now the proposed implementation is that up to July, the old provisions is continued. So that is R1 and 3B is to be filed up to June 2019. And it is also to be continued up to September 2019. But the large taxpayers having aggregate turnover exceeding 5 crore may file the returns monthly from July 2019 simultaneously. It is not mandatory but optional. But from October 2019, it is proposed to be made mandatory. And from October 2019 thereon, he shall not require to file 3B and R1. He will stop filing that. And on a trial basis, the new return can be filed from July 2019 by large taxpayers. The quarterly return filers shall file first return from quarter ending on 31st December 2019 and shall not be required to file 3B and R1 therefrom. Instead, they shall file PMT08 for first 2 months of each quarter. New registered taxpayers will have option to file monthly or quarterly return. Unless option exercised periodically of returns, the periodicity of the returns shall be monthly in all cases. So before filing the first return, it is expected by every taxable person to select an option whether he has to file monthly return or quarterly return. That option is to be exercised at the time of filing the return for the first time. Now there are three types of the returns. Quarterly returns, Sahaj, quarterly Sugam, and monthly or quarterly normal return. In Sahaj return, only B2C supplies and inward supplies attracting RCM is to be given, and but no other supplies like exports supplied to SEZ, deemed exporters is allowed to be filed, and no ITC on missed invoices. So, person who is selling the goods to a B2C and not doing any transaction of export, sales to SEZ, etc., can opt to file the surge returns. He need to file only details of his invoices B2C, and it's very easy and simple and can be opted by the small taxpayers. Quarterly Sugam is a little upward where the B2B supply is also allowed to be furnished. So B2B and B2C supplies can be furnished in the Sugam return, and other details are not allowed to be furnished. And of course, no ITC can be claimed on missing invoices. Then the general category of the return is monthly or quarterly normal return. We say that all types of supplies allowed and can claim ITC on missed invoices also. It is provided to select options by answering prescribed question at the time of filing first return. Once an option exercised and allowed, then it is allowed to change once in a financial year at the beginning of the quarter from Sahaj to Sugam or vice versa. So if you want to change the return type from Sahaj to Sugam, then you are allowed to do so once in a financial year. And that too also you can do so at the beginning of the quarter and not thereafter. But you can switch over from Sahaj or Sugam to normal return more than once in a financial year. That is very beautiful. That if you want to go for the more complex return, then you are allowed for more than once in a financial year. But again, the exercising option has to be selected at the beginning of the quarter. You can change the option from monthly to the quarterly or vice versa once in a financial year at the time of filing first return. Return forms. The return form is single but divided in following parts. Form GST Annex 1, that is the details of outward supplies and inward supplies attracting RCM. Form GST Return 1, that is a normal return. Form GST Annex 2, that will be auto-populated drafted draft return based on the invoices supplied by the supplier in Annex 1. Then they have provided for amendment to the returns already furnished. And that you can furnish in Form GST Annex 1A. And based on the Annex 1A, they have also provided a GST return in 1A. And for first 2 months quarterly return filers, they have been required to file a simple return in the form of PMT08. It is somewhat shorter version of 3B. Not much details, very short details which are required to declare the tax liability by the quarterly return filer. That is to be filed for the first 2 months of the quarter. So for the quarter October to December, take an example, you have to file the PMT08 for October and November, and for quarter end in December, you have to file the regular return in Annex 1 and Annex 2 and RT1, RET1. So first 2 months of the quarter, you have to file PMT08, and also interestingly, it is provided if you have nil turnover, nil liability, then also you are required to file PMT08. That one has to take care, otherwise it attracts the late fees. Then GST Annex 1. Form GST Annex 1 is for furnishing details of outward supplies and inward supplies attracting RCM. We know that the registered taxable person is required to pay the tax on two types of the transaction. One is in respect of outward supply and other in respect of inward supplies, on which he is required to pay the tax on reverse charge basis, that is popularly known as RCM. Inward supply is subject to RCM in three cases. Once under the notification mandatory in respect of the certain inward supply like GTA, legal fees, advocate fees, etc., you have to pay the reverse charge mechanism. Under Section 9(4), in case of the certain class of the dealers, like builders, he is required to pay the RCM on unregistered dealer inward supply. Then import of the goods and the services are also subject to reverse charge basis. So all these details are required to be furnished in Annex 1. It has various tables. The table 3A to 3G provided to furnish details of outward supplies. Tables 3H to 3K for details of inward supply attracting RCM, including import of the goods and services from SEZ also. Table 3L is provided for missing documents on which credit claim for any quarter tax period and supplier has not reported the same till filing of the return. Now you have been allowed to claim the ITC on a provisional basis. And when the ITC is claimed on a provisional basis and the supplier has not furnished the invoices, then to the extent you have to pay the tax, and that is being provided in table 3L. Table 4 is for details of supply through e-commerce or operator. Then table 3A, in detail, you have to give GSTN, TIN number and UIN. When the TIN is not there, then certain foreign diplomats is obtained UIN, they have been given UIN. So details of invoices to such dealers, you have to mention TIN and UIN, that is popularly known as a B2B transaction. Now for the B2C transaction, you need not to give the details of the TIN and UIN, etc. And you need not to give the detailed invoices also. So that is to be given in 3A as supplies made to consumers and unregistered person, and that you have to give details net of debit and credit note. So your total net taxable sales in a given period is to be furnished, and that details is to be given HSN wise. So all supplies made to consumers and unregistered persons shall be reported in table 3A. Supplies shall be reported tax rate wise and net of debit and credit notes. HSN code is not required to be reported in this table. That is very interesting to note that for B2C supplies, you need not to show HSN code. Then there is a table 3B. That is very important table as far as the furnishing of the invoice by the registered taxable person. Because based on these details furnished by you, your recipient will be entitled to claim the ITC. And that is the core provisions of the return filing system, because the government, when they collects the tax from the supplier and allows the credit of ITC to the recipient, it expects that the tax which has been claimed as input tax credit by the recipient is deposited into the government treasury. This is the core provisions from the government side is concerned. And as far as the taxable person is concerned, that in the GST, tax is payable on value addition basis. Value addition is calculated by calculating the tax on your outward supply and allowing the ITC, input tax credit, on your inward supply. Take an example, the rate of tax is 10%. You purchase at the rate of 100, at the rate of 10%, 100 rupees worth of the goods, and you sell at the rate of 110. So your value addition is 110 minus 100, that is the 10 rupees. 10 rupees may not be your profit, but it is the value addition you have made to the goods supplied in a chain of transaction in an economy. And the government wants to levy and collect the tax on that 10 rupees of the value addition you have made. How do you calculate? Two methods. One is the invoice reduced price. So you reduce from your 110 sales price your cost of the goods, 100 rupees. 10 is your resultant figure, and you calculate tax on the 10 rupees. 10% is 1 rupee. But there are a lot of problems of this method, because your purchase price is exposed to your buyer. That nobody wants to know that. So therefore, the government has provided a mechanism under the law that you will be entitled to claim the credit of your tax paid on your inward supply. And that government wants that whatever the tax you have claimed as your input tax credit is being deposited by the supplier into government treasury. How do they come to know? Only on the basis of invoices uploaded by the supplier, which are reflected in the purchase returns by the recipient. And the mechanism is that the supplier shall furnish the details of the B2B supply in his outward supply details. And that is the core details, and one has to be very careful in furnishing such details. If your invoice number is not proper, invoice details is not proper, name of the person is not proper, and the GST number of the recipient is not proper, then it will not flow into the annexure 2 of the recipient. So one has to be very careful in furnishing these details. And what are the details asked? The GST number of the recipient, place of supply, and document details. That is the type of the, there are number of the documents: invoice, debit note, credit note, receipt voucher, refund voucher. Out of that, we have to give the details of the invoices and debit note and credit notes here. So you select the type of the document: invoice. If it is a debit note, then you select debit note. If it is a credit note, you select a credit note. All the details of invoices, debit note and credit notes are to be given here only. There is no separate table for showing details of credit note and debit notes of the invoices issued earlier. It has to be given in this table only. A welcome provision, otherwise there was a provision to give the credit note with corresponding invoice number. Here it is not asked. It appears that. So then you give the invoice number and date and the value thereof. Then we have to give the HSN code, tax rate, taxable value. The tax amount shall be auto-calculated. When it is for export, then we have to give the shipping bill and bill of export details altogether. So all supplies other than those attracting the service reverse charge mechanism, taxable supply shall be reported in this table. Reporting of the supplies made to government department and other entities having TDS registration or through persons having TCS regular shall also be reported here. This would include amendments if any also. Supply of goods made to SEZ unit developers to persons located in domestic travel area shall not be reported here. And the same will be treated as imports by the recipient who shall report the same in table 3K. We know that whenever the goods are supplied by the SEZ unit to a unit outside the SEZ area, it is considered an import under the custom law. So that import is subject to RCM at the hands of recipient. So it's not to be shown in table 3B, and it has to be shown by the recipient in his return. Supply of services made by SEZ units to persons located in domestic area shall be reported by the SEZ unit and developers in this table, because that is not considered import of the services. So it will be tax payable by the SEZ unit and developers. Supply of goods or services made to SEZ unit shall not be declared in this table and shall be reported in table 3E or F as the case may be. The value in column 6 shall be the invoice value, whereas the taxable value shall be reported in column 9. Now here we have got the two invoice values. When the goods are subject to valuation under section 15 and the valuation rule thereof, then the tax is payable on the value determined as per the provisions of the law. Your invoice value may be different, but for the purpose of payment of the GST, we have to take the taxable value as determined under the GST law, and that taxable value is to be reported here, because on that value you have to pay the tax. Take the example that you have charged the tax sold the goods, and it is partly to be paid in a money and partly to be paid in kind, then as per the valuation rule, your tax liability should be on the gross amount of the goods sold by you. So that is the taxable value, and you may not show that amount in your bill to the recipient. That is the invoice value. So we may have a two value in an invoice. One is the invoice value and other is the taxable value. So out of that two, we have to report here the taxable value on which GST is collected in the bill. So that value you have to show in this table 3B. It's very cumbersome to furnish these details. At times one can see that. But if you have proper system of recording the outward supply invoices, duly incorporating the details in the invoices, and also those details in the invoices are also reflected in your sales register, then it is easy to prepare this data, and you can upload the data from your Excel based invoice data also. They have provided the utility also exporting the invoices from your Excel data. And one has to be careful to see that all the details all as per your invoices required to be reported in this table must be there in your working sheet. The HSN code and the tax rate, taxable value you have to show here. And one thing is that you need not to show the quantity here. In our e-way bill, we have to show the quantity of the goods and HSN, but here in table 3B, you need not to show the quantity of the goods sold, but the HSN code. In an invoice, it may happen that you have supplied more than the one goods, having a different HSN code. Then at the end of the invoice, you are required to show the HSN by summary and the rate of tax by summary thereof. So accordingly, one can capture the details and can upload in the table 3B. Then table 3CD and 3D is relation to the export of the goods. Export with payment of the tax shall be reported in table 3C, while those without payment of tax shall be reported in table 3D. And shipping bills and bill of export number available till the time of filing return may be reported against export invoices. If the shipping bills are not available at the time of filing return, then they will provide a different utility to mention such details in a separate functionality. But right now we have to show the details of the export, shipping bill and bill of export as and when it is available at the time of furnishing these details. Then table 3E and 3F is in respect of supplies made to SEZ. All supplies made to SEZ units and developers shall be reported in this table, with payment or without payment, with payment in table 3B and without payment in table 3F. In case of supplies made with payment of tax, the supplier will have an option to select if the supplier or SEZ units will claim refund on such supplies. We know that under the law, the SEZ unit is also entitled to claim ITC. And if it doesn't want to claim the ITC, then the suppliers to the SEZ unit can claim the ITC or claim the refund of the outward tax paid by him. So therefore, the provision is made to select an option whether supplier is claiming the refund or recipient SEZ unit is claiming the refund. So one has to select that accordingly. If the supplier is not availing the refund, then the SEZ unit developer will be eligible to avail ITC credit and claim the refund for such credit after export made by them. Then table 3G provides the details of the deemed export. All supplies treated as deemed export shall be reported in this table. This would include amendments if any. Supplier shall declare whether the refund will be claimed by him or by the recipient as it is provided in the SEZ unit and developers, and accordingly one has to fill this table. Then table 3H and 23K is in relation to the inward supplies attracting reverse charge. Interestingly, nil rated tax supply, exempt supplies, and other supplies, non-supplies not required to pay the tax is not to be furnished in Annex 1. It would be furnished in return main part only and not in the Annex 1. Annex 1 only requires to furnish the details of outward supplies on which tax is payable, export of the goods and sales to SEZ with or without payment of the tax only is to be reported here. All other exempt supplies, nil-rated tax supplies, and non-supply is required to be reported in the main part of the return and not in the Annex 1. One more thing, that the advances received for the supply of the service is to be paid the tax at the time of receipt of the advances. Those details of the advances for which you have issued the receipt voucher and refund voucher when it is refunded is not to be reported in Annex 1. That would form part in GST return main part and not in Annex 1. Table 3H provides inward supplies attracting reverse charge. Here what we have to give, all supplies details attracting the reverse charge shall be reported by the recipient. The supplies on which tax is payable by the recipient is not to be shown here and not in Annex 1. That would go in the main part of the return. That one has to take care. Here, what is the details required? In the hands of recipient and not the hands of the supplier. So when you are a recipient of the inward supplies on which you are required to pay reverse charge, those details are to be furnished in table 3H. The amount of advance paid for such shall also to be declared in the month in which the same was paid. We know that under the provisions of the time of payment, under the Act, the tax is payable under RCM as and when you pay for the advances. So those details are also required to be given here. And the value of the supplies reported shall be net of debit note and credit notes and advances on which tax already paid at the time of payment of advance, if any. Where only advance has been paid to the supplier on reporting the same, the credit shall flow to the main return and shall be reversed in table 4 of the said return. The credit can be available only on receipt of the supply and issue of the invoice by the supplier. Import of the services is to be reported in table 3I and it shall be reported with value of the supplies, net of debit and credit notes and advances paid like what we have mentioned in the earlier table. The services received from the SEZ units and developers shall not be reported in this table. Only import of the service from out of India is required to be reported here and we have to give the details of the document, HSN code, tax and the value only. Where only advance has been paid to the supplier, then again we have to report it here and the credit would flow to the main return as and when the services is received. Because under the law, unless you receive the services and the goods, you are not entitled to claim the ITC. So as and when you have paid the tax on advances, then the ITC is not to be allowed, so it will not flow into the main return. Under table 3J, we have to mention the import of the goods. And there also, any reversal of the account of inherit of the credit or otherwise is to be carried out in table 4B of the main return. So these details will be as per the import bill of lading where you have paid the tax, that will be mentioned here. And right now it is provided that it is to be filled by the taxable person and they are also contemplating the migrating the data from the custom ice portal to this return. Till it is migrated, these details are to be filled by the taxable person. Then in table 3K, we have to mention import of the goods from the SEZ likewise. Then in table 3L, missing document on which ITC is claimed is to be reported. The recipient shall provide the document by details of the supplier for which credit has been claimed, but the details of supplies are yet to be uploaded by the first supplier concerned as detailed below. You know that under the law, it is provided to claim the ITC on a provisional basis for missing invoices. So in a previous tax period, if you have claimed the ITC on the missed invoices, and those invoice details are not furnished by the supplier, then ITC what you have claimed is required to be reversed, and that would be shown as your liability in table 3L. So where the supplier has failed to report the supplies after a lapse of two tax periods in case of the monthly return filers and after a lapse of one tax period in case of quarterly return filers, these details are to be given. Where the supplier upload the invoices subsequently after reporting this table information this table, then such credit has to be reversed by the recipient in table 4B of 3 of the main return, and as this credit cannot be availed twice. Because once you have claimed the ITC on the missed invoices, then whatever the details uploaded by the supplier is being calculated in our Annex 2. So when the ITC is claimed on the missed invoices and it is forming part of your main total in Annex 2, then one is required to reduce the ITC, and that is provided in main return. For example, in case where the supplier has made a supply in April but has not reported the same in GST Annex 1 till 10th May, and the recipient has claimed the input tax credit by reporting the same in the main return. Then where the supplier concerned has not uploaded the invoices in the form Annex 1 of April, May or June tax period till 10th July, the recipient shall report the same document wise in this table in form GST April 1 of June, Annex 1 of the June, form GST Annex 2. Now before we discuss this form, there is a provision also for giving the details of the invoices not uploaded in R1 for prior period. Because you know that under the GST law, the R1 details was to be filed in respect of the outward supplies. So there could be a scenario where the tax is paid in the 3B but details of R1 is not furnished, or R1 is furnished but 3B is not included in the 3B. So a provision is made under the GST law in that respect to disclose those transactions in Annex 1 accordingly. Now GST Annex 2 is auto-drafted for details of inward supply on the basis of invoices uploaded by the supplier for the tax period up to 10th of next month. So for the month of the July, whatever the invoices uploaded by the supplier up to the 10th of the August, the details of such invoices would be auto-populated in GST Annex 2. GST Annex 2 is an inward supplies akin to R2. Of course, the R2 is not yet made enforceable, and we are waiting for the development in that regard. But till then, it is decided that would be discussed separately. But from the July 2019, one can upload the details of the invoices. So from the October when it is made mandatory, then from the October GST Annex 2 would reflect the details of invoices uploaded by your supplier, and that would be the basis for the claim of the ITC by you in respective month. Now in Annex 2, Table 3A to 3C provides auto-drafted details of inward supply from registered person, import of the goods from out of India from SEZs on bill of entry and also bill of entry basis. It is auto-populated. You need not to do anything to that. Table 4 provides summary of ITC, and Table 5 for ISD credit received eligible credit only to furnish manually. The form need not to upload separately, but it is deemed to be uploaded when RET1 is uploaded. So it becomes a part of annexure to your main return. So we need not to upload the Annex 2 separately. As and when we furnish the main return, the Annex 2 is deemed to have been uploaded. The details shall be auto-populated from details uploaded by supplier on real-time basis, and and there is a facility to accept the invoices, to reset the invoices, unblock the invoices or reject the invoices up to 10th of the next month. Accepted document will not be available for amendment to the supplier. So the law is provided a mechanism, so once the invoice is uploaded by the supplier and when the recipient finds it's okay, then he has right to accept it. Once he accepts the invoices, that means transaction is locked from both the end and no one can make any amendment. A separate facility for amendment of the accepted invoices will be provided to handle such cases. But any amendment can be made by debit or credit not subject to provision of the Act. So in respect of any invoices which is uploaded and accepted by the recipient, and there are the goods return or value difference, rate of tax varies, then under the law one can issue credit note or debit note as the case may be. Those credit note and debit note can be allowed and is allowed in uploading the returns in the month in which it is issued. So it is not the closure of the door once the invoice is accepted. Any amendments legally permissible is allowed to be uploaded in the Annex 1 as the case may be Annex 2. But recipient cannot make any amendment to the invoices furnished by the supplier. All the things are to be done by the supplier and not by the recipient. Recipient can reject the invoices and he can keep it pending. So once the recipient finds that the invoices uploaded by a particular supplier is not proper, then he has to reject the invoices. Once he rejects the invoices, the supplier can make the amendment to that invoices. So one has to be very careful in preparing this Annex 2. The pending invoice action invoices will not be allowed to be corrected by supplier till it is rejected by recipient. So a facility also provided to keep the action pending. When you have selected option for pending the invoices, then you cannot claim the ITC on the basis of that invoices. As and when you accept the invoices in that month, the ITC would be eligible to claim. But the supplier cannot do anything to those invoices for which the recipient has not accepted or rejected it. So one has to be very careful in filling this information. It shall not be accounted in total ITC in table 4 of main return where the invoices are kept for action pending. In absence of any action not selected by recipient, it is deemed to be accepted. Now, the law presumes once the returns are auto-populated in your Annex 2 and you don't do anything to that and you upload the return, main return, then whatever the invoices uploaded in your Annex 2 would be deemed to be accepted by you. So one has to be very careful and compare the data auto-populate your Annex 2 with your books of account. And there would be a search facility provided by the law and you are the software provider to find out the invoices as per your Annex 2 and as per your books of account. And wherever there is a mismatch of the invoices, then you must reject it. Because thereafter the supplier can make the amendment, but you cannot make any amendment. This is a very important feature and one has to be very careful. So the care should be taken while filing returns to at least take some action in respect of any disputed invoices. Otherwise, it shall be deemed to be accepted. In number of cases, the recipient has got the habit of making amendment to the invoices supplied by the supplier. And that amended details of the invoices are entered in books of accounts. Now, when you make an entry in your books of account as a purchase this or an inward supply, you mention your corrected invoices. Now that you have to see very carefully that wherever you have reduced the amount of the tax invoices, then you must reject it. or debit note or credit note should be issued. Otherwise, there would be a mismatch of the invoices supplied by the supplier and as per your books of account. But you cannot claim the credit of the taxes as per the invoices because you have not made the payment or you are not going to make the payment to the supplier. Under the law, we know very well that the ITC can be claimed only in respect of the payment of the invoices. If you have made the partial payment, then you can claim the ITC only in respect of the amount you have paid to the supplier. So one has to be very careful in accepting the invoice in Annex 2. Now also it is provided the status of the return filed or not filed by the supplier. So one can come to know that whether your supplier is a genuine and honest taxpayer or not, because unless he furnishes the returns and tax pays, he pays the tax, your ITC claim will not be allowed. So the claim of the ITC by the recipient is depending upon the action by the supplier for payment of the tax. So how do you come to know that whether the suppliers file the return or not? So therefore, a facility is provided in Annex 2 to find out the return filed by the supplier and not filed by the supplier. And also it is provided to mention the trade name of the supplier also. But what will happen that in case of the proprietor, the registration certificate is given in the name of the legal name. And his trade name might be different. In our books of accounts, we have entered the trade name of the supplier. So how do you find that? So therefore, a very good feature is provided to mention the trade name of the supplier. If the trade name is not there as per the records of the GST, then they will show the legal name of the supplier. A separate functionality would be provided to search and reject and accept the documents on which credit is taken. Or when we have rejected the invoices or accepted the invoices, and then the ITC we have taken. So ITC availed on such documents shall be shown for reversal in table 4B of return 1 to arrive at the amount of the ITC claim. So there would be a separate functionality for searching the document in such cases. The reversal of such ITC shall be subject to interest as per the provisions of the law. The documents uploaded by any supplier who has not filed the return for previous two consecutive returns tax period shall be indicated in this form, and the credit shall not be available on such document. So the law provides that if the supplier has not filed the returns for two consecutive periods, then the ITC claim by you would be reversed, and whatever the ITC you claim that would be required to be reversed and to pay with interest. The documents uploaded by any supplier who has not filed the return for previous two consecutive tax period shall be, and the credit shall not be available on such document. However, recipient before taking credit can reject or kept pending till return is filed by the supplier, and upon filing return he can accept the invoices and claim ITC. So it is advisable in such cases to keep the invoices pending and to claim the ITC as and when the return is filed by the supplier. It is expected by the government that the recipient can control the supplier. But in case of a small SME or MSME, it is not in the hands of the MSME or small taxpayers to control the large taxpayers, MNC, government department, and multinational companies. Now, in those cases, if the supplier has not furnished the details and the recipient has paid the tax to them, and under the law, credit is not allowed. Now, that is the big concern for the small and MSME. Government is keen to protect the interests of the small and medium enterprises. And in India, we have got a large number of such dealers, and they form an important part of an economy and the growth of the government of India. It is the goal of the government of India to take into the fifth in the largest economy over the world. The target is set by the new finance minister. But if they undermine the role of the growth of the small and medium enterprise, then it is very difficult to reach that target. So it is the interest of the government and in the interest of the small taxpayers, the provisions like this is to be requires to be deleted. It should be provided other way that as and when the tax is collected from the small taxpayers, small and medium enterprise, it would be obligatory on the part of the large taxpayers to pay the tax, and the claim of the ITC of the small taxpayer should not be disallowed in any cases. That is required in the interest of the economy of India, and we know that India survives on the ground of the small taxpayers. Then we go to the GST return 1. That is the main return, which auto-populates the details from the Annex 1 supplied by you and auto-populate details of the ITC on the basis of the Annex 2 inward supplies. So table 3A to 7 is auto-populated from Annex 1. In table 8, a very good provision is made to disclose the liabilities relating to prior period and not shown in any earlier return, including 3B, can be shown here. And no details of invoice bias to be given here. Suppose you have missed the transaction in 3B of the June 2019, and from July the return provision is made mandatory. Then those missed invoices you can show the liability in table 8 of the RET1, return 1. Table 3B provides liability for RCM auto-populated from Annex 1, but it does not provide separate draw for showing RCM liability of a previous period which you have not shown here. So they should provide some table or raw for disclosing the liability of the RCM which is not shown in earlier return. Table 3C provides details of debit and credit note issued, advances received, adjusted and other reduction in liabilities. In subtable 3, details of advances received net of refund vouchers to be shown manually, because we know that advances details are not forming part of Annexure 1. So all these advances on which tax is payable is to be reflected in table 3C. And also adjustment of the advances also to be shown manually in table 3C sub column 4. In sub column 5, it is allowed to show manually the reduction of any liability from composition to normal levy or any other reduction in the liability. Is a very good feature that any adjustment required to be made that can be mentioned in this table. Table 3D provides details of non-taxable supply, which is not shown in Annex 1, and it is to be shown manually. It includes exempted supply, nil-rated supply, non-GST supply, and it includes the non-supply also. We know that as per Schedule 3, certain transactions are not considered neither services nor goods or both. So these are popularly known as a non-supply. It is not considered as a supply on which no tax is payable. So all these non-supply provided in Schedule 3 is to be reported in this table. Any outward supply which attracts the RCM at the hands of the recipient is also to be shown here on. Supply of goods by SEZ to the DTA, domestic tariff area, it is taxable at the hands of the DTA, so that supply is also required to be shown here. In short, in table 3D, all the supplies which are not taxable does not attract any tax payable, that is to be shown here. Table 4 provides for summary of inward supply for claiming ITC. Now this is also a very good table, one has to be filled properly. We know that once you claim the ITC, availed it, and later on it is to be reversed, then it attracts the interest. So one has to carefully fill this table, it is to be filled manually in certain cases. So most of the details are auto-populated from Annex 2. Following details to be given manually, which are eligible credit not claimed prior to new return. That is in table 4.4. Provisional ITC on missing documents, that also you can show it here. Any upward adjustment of ITC due to receipt of credit note in respect of any inward supply on which ITC was not claimed. Since in details of the ITC it is already reduced in auto-populated details in Annex 2, so therefore upward adjustment in ITC is to be provided here. Any other adjustment of ITC including reclaim, that is to be shown in table 411. Table 4b provides details of reversal of ITC. Credit of ITC taken on document accepted in previous return and rejected in the current period auto-populated in table 4b1. Supplies not eligible for credit including ISD to show manually in this table. Reversal of credit in respect of claim of provisional credit in earlier period, but documents have been uploaded in the current tax periods need to be shown manually. As it is already included in table 4.3 above, to avoid duplication of the claim, the reversal is required to be shown here. Because at the time of the filing previous tax periods, you have shown in missing invoices. And again when the invoices are uploaded, then it forms part of your total ITC in the subsequent period. So to avoid the duplication of the claim, this adjustment is required to be shown. Reversal of credit in respect of claim of provisional credit in earlier period. Documents have been uploaded in the current period need to be shown manually under table 4.3. Reversal of ITC as per the law is to be shown manually in table 4.4. Now we know that under the certain rules like personal supplies, supplies for the non-taxable supplier, exempt supplies, we are required to reverse the ITC under the various subsection and sections rules of the law. All these details are to be shown under one table only. We need not to give the bifurcation rules wise or section wise, whether eligible, not eligible, whatever it may be. We have to show the reversal of the ITC under this table manually. Any downward adjustment of ITC, including on account of transition from composition to normal or any reason, is to be shown in sub table 5. Table 4D provides for ITC declared during first two periods by our quarterly return filers for adjustment in return. We know that quarterly return filers are required to file monthly PMT08 return. While filing the PMT08, he can make the claim of the ITC on the basis of his books of account. First 2 months he would have adjusted the ITC against his outward tax liability. When you file the return for the quarterly period, then a table is provided to show whatever the claim you have made in PMT08. So your total claim as per the Annex 2 for the quarter is say 1000 rupees. And you have claimed 800 in the first two months, then 800 is reduced and the balance amount is being allowed to be claimed in this return. So that adjustment is required to be shown in table 4D. In table 4E, details of ITC on capital goods and ITC on the services out of the ITC net available is to be shown and given in manually. Now we do not know why they want the separate disclosure for these two items. Maybe they want to know what are the ITC or claim for the capital goods. We can understand that. But why they want to show the differentiation of the ITC on input services? Probably under Rule 89.5. When they are allowing the ITC refund of the unutilized ITC, the rule provides that it cannot be allowed in respect of the input services. And for that reason, they have asked the details of the input services on which you have claimed the ITC. That could be one of the reasons for asking these details. So it's not that easy to compile Annex 2. Although government said it is a simple return, but when we look at the return 1, then we need to again maintain the books of accounts invoice level wise to find out credit note, invoices, ITC claim, not claim, credit note in respect of the ITC claim, credit note in respect of ITC not claim. So you can make the proper adjustment. If you miss the adjustment, then there are chances of payment of the tax twice, or you may claim the ITC twice. So invoice-wise accounting entry for the ITC requires to be maintained by the recipient, and for that purpose he should have a competent account assistant and a well-equipped staff with the technological background, and a proper software system is required to find out the details of the claim of the ITC, which will enable them to furnish the detail in the return in their books of accounts, and also to make available for verification by the GST auditor and also department. So one has to be very careful in preparing the return. Then other tables in the return also provides for TDS and the TCS. Now there is a very peculiar provisions. Under the income taxes under the present VAT laws in the certain states, when the tax is deducted, then the credit of the TDS is allowed provisionally. And there is a provision also that once the tax is deducted at the hands of the payee, at the hands of the taxable person, then the government cannot demand the recovery of the tax from that person again. The tax is required to be paid by the person who has deducted the tax or collected the tax. Now, under the GST law, they have provided a mechanism in such a way that the credit of the tax deducted at source and tax collected at source will be allowed only upon furnishing of the details in the return by those respective persons. If the details are not furnished in the return or no returns are furnished, then the claimant person is not allowed to take the credit. He is hit twice. Once from his amount payable, tax is deducted. So he has already paid the tax to the person concerned. And the GST law does not allow credit of those taxes in the return. So this provisions is very harsh, and it requires to be amended and provide the credit of the tax deducted and tax collected, irrespective of it is paid by the tax collector or tax deducting. Otherwise, allow me to pay the tax directly in their name. Then at least I am sure that I have paid the tax and I am claiming the proper credit. That provision is required to be considered properly. Then interest details is also to be shown in the table, and it is to be auto calculated in certain cases. When you uploaded the invoices of the previous month, then the interest is auto calculated, and of course late fees. Then there is a provision for details of the payment of the tax refund claim, and at last there is a verification column. So GST return 1 is the main return, and one has to be careful in filing those details. It's not that simple, but it requires the detailed verification and the maintenance of the proper books of accounts so that you can file properly the return correct and complete. Then the government has provided for amendment of the details furnished by you. It is proposed to be restricted in certain cases only. Once or twice you will be required or you are allowed to amend the return. And that amendment is to be made in Annex 1A. Is a separate form is provided for amendments in the details furnished by you. So Form Annex 1A provides for amendment to details of outward supplies, import and inward supplies attracting RCM. It allows amendment to details already furnished in any previous tax periods. But no amendment can be made through this return utility in respect of B2B supplies, exports without payment of the tax, export with payment of the tax, supplies to SEZ with or without payment of tax, shown in table 3B, 3C, 3E, and 3F of Annexure 1. The amendments to these invoices to be carried out in Annex 1 itself only. It's not that they have closed the door, but while furnishing the details of the outer supplies and subsequent return, one can make the amendment to that details also. Based upon details furnished Annex 1A from GST return 1A shall be auto-populated. So the government contemplates furnishing of the amendment Annex 1A and the return thereof also. It allows to show manually data in respect of certain information like liabilities for previous periods not shown, details of supplies having no liability, upward adjustment of ITC and details of reversal of ITC, etc. Filing process of both amendment is same as that of Annex 1 and RET 1. It can be filed for any period. Frequency of filing, it would be as per the law till it is not prescribed. If it results any liability, then needs to pay, but if it results into the refund, you cannot claim by this return 1A. The refund, if any, shall be carried forward in the main return in electronic credit ledger of the subsequent period for utilization of payment as per the law. In respect of any amendment, revised value shall be reported instead of amended value. For example, if the original value 100 was shown, 100 was, and it was shown instead of 120. Then to show revised value 120 instead of 20. Amendments to ITC claim earlier to show in main return and not through the amendment return. That is also provided. Then we have got a form GST PMT08 to be filed by the quarterly return filers for the first 2 months of the quarter. And it is to be filed every first 2 months, even for the nil turnover also. It provides details of summary of self-assessed liability, very short summary of the details, not more details, and claim of ITC with details of payment of tax. It's a very simple form, really. And not much details are required to be filed. Only you have to show what is your tax liability, what is your ITC claim, and net tax liability which you are allowed to pay. Any excess ITC or short liability as per the quasi return shall be subject to interest. So one has to be very careful in showing the tax liability and the ITC claim. It should be as per the law and as per your books of accounts. Late filing of the PMT08 shall be subject to interest and of course late fees. This brings to the end of my presentation. I hope that you may like this presentation. It is based on the present proposed provisions, subject to the final provisions. Thank you very much. Keep smiling. Be a partner to building of a strong nation by complying with provisions in time. Thank you very much.